Mute yourself. So Jai Shankar ji married Sri Vidya ji, who was also the student of the same course as per Pujya Swamiji's wishes. And they settled in Chennai after the course and was teaching Vedanta and Sanskritam to interested people in Chennai. Jai Shankar ji and Sri Vidya ji were doing seva work near Chennai under the banner of Aim for Seva as per the wishes of their guru. In 2004, Pujya Swamiji asked Jai Shankar ji to take over the administration of Aim for Seva full time. In the meantime, tsunami struck, and from that day, they both started working full time for tsunami relief and rehabilitation under Aim for Seva program. And Jai Shankar ji worked as joint secretary for Aim for Seva for nearly 3 years and was responsible for expanding the main program, Free Students Home for Children in rural areas across India. Pujya Swamiji asked Jai Shankar ji and his Guru Bhai Kalyan Kumar ji to buy some land in rural area and build a Gurukulam around 2010 as a tribute to his Guru. Jai Shankar ji along with Kalyan Kumar ji and Sri Vidya ji is now building Arsha Vidya Varshini Gurukulam at Dakshinamurti Sarovar, Terku Pankulam, Kallirai Kurichi, Tirunelveli district. The plan is to build a Gurukulam with rooms, lecture hall, kitchen, and dining facilities for 50 people to stay and study. At present, there is a temple of Vallabha Mahaganapati, Sharadamba, and Adishankaracharya, and a Goshala for the protection of Desi cows with more than 25 cows. So Jai Shankar ji plans to teach Vedanta and Sanskritam primarily for adults, but also plans to have yoga camps and children's camps and youth camps in the future. As of now, he's conducting online classes on Vedanta, Sanskritam, and chanting. I will send you some pictures that I get to see on a daily basis from the Gurukulam, and it is beautiful. The number of lotuses that they have in their ponds and the pujas that are done there are amazing. So I will share those pictures. For now, I really appreciate your presence here, Jai Shankar ji. I would just hand over to you to teach us Atma Jnanam.
Yeah, namaste. Om Sada Shiva Samarambham Shankaracharya Madhyamam Asmadacharya Paryantam Vande Guru Paramparam. So you've been studying already Bhagavad Gita, second chapter. So the real teaching of Bhagavad Gita starts from the 11th verse of the second chapter. Till then it is only a setting of the context. So Arjuna is confused, does not know the difference between dharma and adharma. Also he sees people like Bhishma and Drona on the other side. And suddenly he thinks that if he kills his gurus, that is too much for him to actually even consider. So he thinks that if he kills all the dharmic people, how will he really uphold dharma? So that's the main confusion which he has. And he is overcome by compassion also. So with all this confusion and a particular emotion of karunya, you can say, he is not ready to fight actually. So he comes all the way to the battle and tells Krishna that I won't fight now. So initially Krishna, even in the second chapter beginning, only is giving him some advice. So Krishna was not thinking of teaching any Vedanta to Arjuna even then. But then later in the when Arjuna starts to speak again, because Krishna really gives a verbal lashing, saying that whatever you are doing is anarya jushtam, aswargyam, akirtikiram, klaibyam mas magama, like that. He tells certain things like don't be like a ignoble person, anarya. Okay, so whatever you are doing is not going to give you any fame. So give up your unmanliness, you can say, correct? All these things he says initially. Then Arjuna says, no, it's not like you think. Okay, so it is not easy to face Drona or Bhishma on the other side. So I'm completely confused now. And teach me. So he says, Sishyasteham. So I am your Shishya. And Yat Shreyas Nishchitam Bruhi Tanme, he says. Yat Shreyas. Whatever is Shreyas, teach me that. So Shreyas can be considered as whatever is ultimately good. In this context, it means only moksha. Moksha Shastram is called Shreyas. Even in Kathopanishad, it is talked about Shreyas cha, Preyas cha, like that. Preyas means whatever worldly good which we can get. Okay. But Shreyas is always considered as moksha. So he says, teach me Shreyas now because I don't see me being happy either in this world or hereafter also, he says. Okay, so whether I am going to win and enjoy the kingdom here, or I die in the battle and I attain Swarga. Because a Kshatriya fighting in a Dharmic war, if he dies in the battle also is supposed to go to Swarga. So he says, without all these people, I will not be either happy here nor there. So he is not seeing himself as a happy person anyway. So that becomes a fundamental problem to him. And then he says, now you teach me. Then he thinks that the only way, because all other things he has already accomplished, is like if you look at the Purushartha for any person, we normally say Dharma, Artha, and Kama. So Arjuna is not lacking in any of these things already, if you understand. He is a highly accomplished person. So Vedanta itself can be taught to only, I think, or easily taught. Okay, for others it is a little bit difficult to get it easily. For the people who are accomplished and those who see the limitations of their own accomplishment. Okay, so you have to be an accomplished person, and if you are able to see the limitations of your own accomplishments, then you are ready to learn Vedanta. Okay, because now you see that whatever you may achieve in this world or even hereafter, if it is not going to satisfy you, you have seen that clearly, means now you are looking for something else. What is the solution then? Is there really any solution at all? Because however great my accomplishment may be, I see myself still as a limited person only. As long as I see myself as a limited individual, I am not going to be satisfied with myself. Everybody is a self-conscious person, and our self-conscious is so evolved that we are all the time judging ourselves. And unless in my own judgment I am totally acceptable to myself, I cannot consider myself to be satisfied. And unless I am self-satisfied, I am just struggling all the time, correct? I want to become something and hope that by becoming something, I will be satisfied or I'll be acceptable to myself. So one has to first accomplish worldly things and then see their limitations in terms of not being able to make you acceptable to yourself, because your fundamental problem is one of self non-acceptance. As long as your fundamental problem uh, you have not appreciated it properly, study of Vedanta will only be scholarly. It can be, you can get a PhD, or many people go to some guru just for some punya, correct? You go and sit in a class that you are in the presence of, you are having satsanga, you are with a uh, you are with a saint and all that, okay? But you are not going to get really what Vedanta can give you, because Vedanta is telling you that it is going to give you limitlessness. Are you ready to receive it then? Now, when will you become ready to receive the teaching? Is when you appreciate your own fundamental problem, which Arjuna did at that time, because he clearly saw that there is no way out for him. In this world or hereafter, he thought he will never be happy. Sorrow was so complete for him. And so then he says, you teach me Shreyas, I am your Shishya, because he considered at least himself to be qualified. So he says, I am your Shishya, please teach me. So then Bhagavan starts the teaching. He says, Ashocyan Anvashochastvam. Like that, Gita starts. And even Shankara Bhashya, actually, there is an introduction. And Shankaracharya starts commentary only from the second chapter, 11th verse. Until then, Shankara doesn't deem the other verses as worthy of commentary. Actually, really, he thought anybody can read it and easily understand. So the Ashocyan, like that, Bhagavan starts. And if you see the end of Gita also, 18th chapter, Ma Shucha Sarva Dharman Parityajya Mamekam Sharanam Vraja Aham Tva Sarva Papebhyaha Mokshayishyami Ma Shuchaha. So the entire teaching is what about crossing sorrow. Okay, because Ashocyan means it starts with for the things for which you should not grieve. Okay, you should not become sorrow. Ashocyan means actually Gita Shastra starts with a negative particle. The teaching itself is starting with a. See, normally we may consider that starting with the nanj. Nanj is the prefix there, grammatically, if you see. Starting the Shastra with a negative prefix may not be considered to be Mangalam and all that, but this is a Nivritti Shastra. That's what we have to understand. We have a Pravritti Shastra and a Nivritti Shastra. Pravritti is all about doing things, doing different yajna, karma, and attaining whatever you can attain in this world or hereafter. That's the prayers which we say, correct? Whatever you accomplish. But then if you have seen the limitations of that, and now you want to address yourself and address your fundamental problem and see whether there is any solution. Because fundamentally, if you see in our own vision, we are a limited person. And whatever I do, whatever I add, anything finite I add to another limited finite thing, it is still finite only. However big you add, it is never going to become infinite. So the infinite can never be created. Understand that. Or you cannot go and reach it also. So that's why in Mundaka Upanishad also it says, Nasti akritaha kritena. This is the fundamental thing. The infinite is akritaha. Akritaha means what? It cannot be the result of any action. Because results of action can only be either you create something newly or something is already there, you are polishing it, you are purifying it in some manner, or something, some place is there and you have to reach there. Okay, let us say. Like this, there are only a few results of action. In general, if you look at it, in fact, 4 types of results of action are there, is what we say in the Shastra. But infinite cannot be any of these things, because infinite means it cannot be created newly, it has to be already there. The limitless cannot be created. The limitless cannot be tainted in any manner, because you need another limitless to taint the limitless, I think. So, but that's not possible logically. So then, if the limitless is already there, then why do I not know it? That becomes the problem then, correct? It's not a problem of reaching limitless newly or anything. It has to be already there. That is the only way it can be. And if it is already there, then it becomes a problem of ignorance. If it is a problem of ignorance, then we have to know about it properly. So that's why there is a teaching. So ours is a teaching tradition all the way. That is because you have to understand the teaching. And to understand the teaching, again, we require a guru also. Because it's not something for self-study. Unlike all other subject matter, we are all used to knowing things as objects. It may be anything, even a black hole where you cannot use any perception really, because even light is sucked, we say. But even a black hole has to be inferred and visualized in a certain manner, correct, in your mind. So we are used to knowing everything as an object of our mind. That's how we have known everything. But this knowledge, self-knowledge, the main problem or the difference also you have to appreciate, correct? What is the difference in self-knowledge compared to any other knowledge? Why are we talking about qualifications to? Of course, every knowledge requires a certain qualification, correct? If you want to study advanced physics, then first they will say go and read mathematics. Also, you have to learn enough to appreciate certain things, let us say. So all knowledge requires prerequisites, but here it is not only an intellectual prerequisite, but you have to have certain emotional maturity. So we are talking about a certain disposition of your mind also is required. All these things are talked about because here you have to know yourself, which is the subject. Now, what is the difficulty in knowing myself? Doesn't everybody know oneself? Already we all know myself. I ask who are you means you are going to give your biography, or even initially a biography of me also was given as an introduction here, correct? So there is already a biography for everybody as an individual. But the thing is whether that individuality is real or not. Okay, because we are now questioning that itself. All our life, we have taken ourselves as an individual, and that is taken for granted. In fact, we have never analyzed whether this individuality is real or not. Like every other thing, we have to also analyze our subjective identity. World knowledge as a whole, if you take scientific knowledge and all other knowledge, has progressed a lot with reference to objective knowledge. Lot of analysis has been done. Our ability to perceive has increased because now it has become enhanced with telescope, microscope, and our ability to infer. All these things are very good. Okay, it has progressed a lot. So we do understand the external world a lot. But what about yourself? So there we cannot objectify ourselves. That is the first problem. All other knowledge, we have learnt it as an objective knowledge by visualizing in your mind. Okay. By objectifying something in your mind only you have known. But now this is about yourself, and you have no way of objectifying yourself because you are always the eternal subject. The subject can never be objectified. That's the first thing. That's why it is different. The other problem is what? There is also no other means of knowledge which can talk about the subject, because all other means of knowledge are used by the subject to know any object of knowledge. So perception means there are sense organs are there, 5 sense organs are there, and enhanced perception also is there. You can use other instruments additionally. But all of them are being used by the subject to know some other object. So they are not throwing any light on the subject. And inference also is dependent on perception. So our major means of knowledge is, you can say, whatever we can know, the major means are all only useful to know external objects. They are not revealing any conscious being is never objectified. You may say, well, then what about other people? We are really objectifying only the body. Understand that nobody has ever objectified the consciousness. Everybody is still struggling to even define what is consciousness. Most of the scientists, they cannot come to even an agreement whether something called consciousness is there or not. So at that level only people are there, because there are also another type of Advaitin. Okay, monist they call them. What is that? There are people called material monist, we say. Material monist means they only say everything is matter. There is no mind also, they don't accept. They say mind is an epiphenomenon of matter. Something happens in your brain, and that is only like perceived as though it is a mind. So like this also there are theories are there. People are serious about that. So there is a certain confusion with regards to who you are. In fact, Shankara talks about this in the beginning of Brihadaranyaka Bhashya also. Because he says Veda is required as an independent means of knowledge to reveal that there is a Atma other than the body. That itself, Deha Vyatirikta Atma, is not very well known to everybody. Understand that. There is confusion about that. Buddhist comes and says there is no Atma at all. He says Niratma. Nairatmyam is our Siddhanta. Although some people are now trying to say that Buddhism and Advaita and all are one and the same and all that, but if you go and talk to a real Buddhist monk, I have done that, they are very clear about what they mean by Shunya or whatever. There is no Atma. They don't talk about any Atma really. And then there are others who talk about Atma in Anuparimana, and Jains are saying Atma is the size of the body. And others are saying Atma, Nayayika is saying something. So there are so many contentions about this. And some people say there is nothing, again, only physically everything comes together like the scientist. And some epiphenomenon is there. So then Veda is the only means of knowledge which has to come and tell me that there is an Atma. And this Atma surveys, and it can take another body also. Okay. So Deha Vyatirikta Atma, Dehantara Sambandhi Atma, like this Bhashyakara is saying. These things have to be established by the Veda first. Then what is the nature of this Dehantara Sambandhi Atma or Deha Vyatirikta Atma? The self which is independent of this body and the self which is capable of taking another body, what is the real nature of that? Because even when you are looking at this self as a conscious entity, which is independent of one's physical body and mind, etc., still it can be considered only as a limited individual. Is that my reality? Because as long as I am a limited individual, I am going to have problems. Because in my own vision, if I am limited, I am not able to accept that. Instinctively, I am always struggling to get rid of any kind of limitation which I see in myself. Because I know that I am limited in terms of knowledge, in terms of the Shakti which I have, the power, what I can do, in terms of everything, I am limited only. Correct? In whichever way I look at it, even the ability to be happy, there is always a diminishing returns with reference to anything which I enjoy. First time you enjoy something, it's not the same thing as the 100th time, correct? That's why we are having always different hit songs. Every time your billboard is changing. The top 10 is not the same, correct? Some songs may be there for 1 year and all that, but still afterwards it's gone. So your ability to enjoy something is also not the same. So you are only having a life of becoming. That's what we call samsara. So unless we appreciate this samsara and seek a fundamental solution for that, not some going after one more thing, correct? It's not really going to make a fundamental difference. So that's what Arjuna has recognized. And Bhagavan also now teaches Vedanta only. Okay, when Bhagavan starts the teaching, it is total. He straight away goes to the what is the nature of Atma. Because the problem with Arjuna is that he thinks that he is killing all these people. And because of that only his sorrow is there. Now death is the most, you can say, in terms of the worldly things which are happening, what are all the things for which somebody can be sorrowful? Even if you look at it, correct? Death stands at the highest level, correct? It is like the Prathama Malla. We have a Prathama Malla Nyaya in Sanskritam. What is the Prathama Malla Nyaya? If you want to become the world champion in wrestling, you don't go and fight each and every person. 7 billion people are there, let us say. You only go and fight whoever is the current world champion, correct? And then you have become the world champion. Similarly, here with reference to sorrow, which is the one you think that sorrow is legitimate for which event, or if something happens? Even many things, even worldly people will say, no, these things and all, why are you sad? You can always do something about it, whatever. But some death happens means everybody thinks, okay, we have to give our condolence, and people will be mourning for some time. It is proper and all that. But even that, Bhagavan says, is not really fit to be worried about or grieved. He says nothing in this world is really worthy of your sorrow. That is what he starts. He says, Asocyan. Okay, so whatever, because Arjuna is facing death both on his side and others. Because once the battle starts, people are going to die. And even that, he says, is not worthy of grieving. is not fit to be grieved for. And you are grieving for that, he says. Ashochan anvashochastvam. And then you are also giving all bhashan. Prajnavadamscha bhashase. Why? Because he then gives his teaching. What is that? Gatasuna gatasumscha nanushochanti panditaha. Those who are panditaha, those who know the self. Panda means one who has self-knowledge. Like that, Bhashyakara gives the meaning. Pandita means one who has panda. Panda means knowledge, self-knowledge. And those who have the knowledge of the self, they do not grieve for those who are living, okay, or those who have, for whom the breath has already gone. Gata asun means the one's breath has gone, and the other people who are living are breathing still. So they do not grieve for those who are breathing or those who are not breathing. Why? What is the reason for this? Means then he continues. He says, see, natve vaham jatu nasam natvam neme janadhipaha nachaiva na bhavishyamaha sarve vayamatah param. So then he straight away goes and says, you think that these people are dying and they won't be there, correct? But that's not the truth. There was never a time when you were not there. There was never a time when I was not there. Okay, you and me, fine. Then, because Krishna is an avatara, he can say that being Bhagavan, I am always there. But he says, no, Arjuna, you as an individual also, you were always there. Then what about all these people, all the other kings and all the soldiers who have gathered here? They were also always there, he says. Okay. So then on what basis he is saying this? So that has to be taught, because now Krishna is saying nobody ever dies, in fact. Then what is really dying then? Who is really born? So that question has to be looked at. So what is born is only the body. Okay. In fact, the body is all the time born in one way if we look at it, because it is changing all the time. So later on, Bhagavan is going to give that logic. Because how can you say, now the next question is, he has said that we have all been always there. So that means what? You don't have to grieve for anybody's death really. Because they are anyway going to be there. Whether they are not here in the form in which you have seen can be taken as a reason for your grief. Okay, in one way. But that's all. That's not really, should not really bother you. Because everybody is anyway present only. They are all, nobody becomes non-existent. Okay, everybody is always existent. How can you say that? Because you are existent even in this body, correct? While the body is all the time changing. Body is not the same. So he says, Dehe nosmin yatha dehe aumaram yavvanam jara tatha dehantara praptihi dhirastatra na muhyati. So the dhiraha means one viveki, one who can analyze and arrive at discriminative knowledge. So those who can analyze can very clearly see that the I, whatever the I sense is there, correct? Whatever I call as I is always I only. Whether you are a baby, whether you have become a youth, an adult, later on you are becoming older. So the same, whoever was the I before is also the I now. I never changes, but body is all the time changing. In fact, you look at your old photo now, you can't even recognize. For some people, or most of them don't recognize me. In fact, even my classmates, when they look at me now, they don't recognize me very easily. But anyway, so your looks are changing. Your mind also has changed. Your attitudes are changing all the time. So you are changing in one way, but you are the same also. The I sense never changes. I is always I. The same I is there, the Dehi. That's what Bhagavan says. So here Bhagavan is trying to teach you about the nature of the Dehi rather than the Deha. We are all looking at the Deha and the body, correct? The body only we are looking at and thinking that body is getting destroyed. body will get destroyed because it is all the time anyway changing, correct? It is anything subjected to space-time will get destroyed in space-time. You cannot stop it. In fact, later on he says, Tasmad apariharyerthe natvam shochitum arhasi. That will come later. He says, something which you cannot do anything about, correct? Apariharyerthe means what? There is no parihara for it. You cannot go and do something or mitigate it in any way. You have no control over something, let us say, then why are you even worrying about it? The only thing you can do in that case is to accept it. In fact, most of the sorrow is only because you are not able to accept the reality. Because sorrow itself is born out of denial. That's what we have to understand. Those who face difficulty, not everybody is sorrowful. Because even if you are facing a very difficult situation, you just see, okay, this is what is there, what can I do here? So if your thinking is like that, then you are only focused on doing something to mitigate whatever difficulty you are facing. But those who are sorrowful, the problem with them is what? They are not ready to accept whatever has happened. There is a denial. Denial only is going to lead you to sorrow because you are all the time thinking, why did this happen to me? This should not have happened. I cannot believe it. And then what? That kind of thinking only leads you to sorrow, and sorrow makes you immobilized. You are not doing anything also about whatever you can do or you should have done also, you are not doing now because you are just sorrowful, sad, you are immobilized. So if you can actually accept the reality, in fact, there is no big sorrow really. But the problem is acceptance is not there. We cannot accept facts. We are not able to look at things objectively. So the first qualification to receive this knowledge is you should have certain objectivity with reference to whatever is happening in this world. Okay. So we have to look at things objectively. And so he now goes into that. He says, Matras Parshastu Kaunteya Chitoshna Sukha Dukkadaha Agamapayino Nityaha Tamsitikshasva Bharata. So he says, see, this sense organs will come into touch with sense objects, correct? You cannot do anything about it. That is the nature of sense organs. When they are active, they will be in touch with the sense objects, and that is going to produce certain stimulus, let us say, correct? Stimuli, all the time we are sensory stimuli we are receiving. What are you going to do about it? Some are pleasant, some are not pleasant. And they do not last forever also. Agama. So Agama Payino Anityaha, he says. They are all Anitya. So now you have to see them for what they are. Okay, there will be heat, cold, pleasure, pain. This Dvandva will always be there. Okay. So you have to accept them as it is. So even in life, there will always be ups and downs. Because Shani never stays in one place, correct? Every 30 years, everybody's life will come to a certain, you will face everything in 30 years because Shani's cycle is 30 years, correct? So there will be ups and downs. All this relatively, if you look at it, always there are two ends to everything. And you have to just face it. Okay, so that part, so the one who is able to objectively appreciate whatever is there in the world, for such a person only you can even teach this knowledge. Okay, so he talks about that. So first you try to look at the things objectively, and you should learn to do that first. Okay, and then he says, Yamhi navyathayantyete purusham purusharshabha samadukkhasukam dhiram tomritatvaya kalpate. So kalpate is a very important word here. So you are qualified or fit for what? Amritatvaya. Who is fit for Amritatvam? Amritatvam is really limitlessness. Because immortality, let us say in English, Amritatvam means really immortality. Immortality means limitlessness with reference to time. But we are not only talking about limitlessness with reference to time here. Limitlessness means we say Desha Kala Vastu Aparichinnaha. With reference to space also, you are limitless. With reference to time also, you have to be limitless. And with reference to objects, there are limitless objects are there. But even all those objects in reality are there only as names and forms. What is the reality of them, we have to see. So with reference to all these things, we have to understand this limitlessness. And who is qualified for this? So yamhina vyathayantyete, the one who is not. So vyathayantyete means what? Who is able to, who is not swayed by all these things, correct? Samadukha sukham dhiram also he says. So for dukkha and sukha, you have a certain samatvam. You are able to accept the results of your action with certain equanimity. In fact, this 15th verse itself is actually a summarized karma yoga is there, complete karma yoga, which Bhagavan will talk later in the second chapter only. He will talk about it later, buddhi yoga, like that. And he will say later on, he will say karmanyeva adhikaraste ma phaleshu kadachana and all that, correct? So samatvam yoga uchyate also will come. That samatvam is coming here already. In the 15th verse, if you see, he says, who is fit for this knowledge? Amritatvaya kalpate. Who is fit for this knowledge, for gaining immortality? The one who is discriminative, dhiraha. You should have a certain discriminative, viveka has to be there. And also you should be able to face everything objectively. That is the vairagya part. So dispassion or vairagya means not hating things or anything. You should be able to accept things and face things objectively for whatever they are. Okay? Because hatred also is a problem. Attachment also is a problem. Equally what? Like and dislike both are a problem. Vairagya is not disliking something. Vairagya is seeing things for what they are really. If you are able to understand that any worldly accomplishment is not really going to make me totally satisfied, then you have Vairagya. That if you are able to appreciate, still you can go and do whatever you are doing in the world, correct? Everybody, we are all playing so many roles. Every role has a certain duty. You cannot stop doing all that tomorrow just because you attended a Vedanta class. Or in fact, Vedanta doesn't even ask you to do that really. In the entire Gita, Bhagavan is always saying, do whatever is supposed to be done. In fact, you cannot be inactive even if you want to be, because that's your nature. But your attitude towards action has to completely change. That's why the Karma Yoga is actually called Buddhi Yoga by Bhagavan. Later on, you will see that in the second chapter itself. It's a yoga of attitude. Your attitude towards karma and karma phala, the action and the results of action have to completely undergo a change. Because till now you are thinking by doing something and achieving some results of action, you can be happy, you can be totally satisfied and all that. That's all totally Shobhanadhyasa only. It is all only subjective fascination, I would say. It's only your fantasy. That's never going to become real. So once you understand the nature of the results of action, automatically certain dispassion is there. You know what it is. Okay, money still has buying power. Nobody is denying that. Okay. So you use it for whatever it is worth it. But you don't think that only because I have money I'll be happy, or only because some particular thing I have I'm going to be happy. That's not going to be the case anymore. Now you are trying to understand who you are really. Because I have taken myself for granted as an individual all these days. So who am I really? That's what I have to understand, correct? So to understand that, first you should have a certain disposition of your mind itself. Because if you think that by achieving something or attaining something only I'm going to be happy, the implication of that is you have already taken yourself as an individual separate from the object you want to attain. then you cannot be taught Advaita. Understand that. That's why we are talking so much about you should have a certain mastery over your likes and dislikes. And Karma Yoga, all this Raga Dvesha, you should master. Why Bhagavan is talking so much? Because the implication of any desire, what is implied by that is you are a wanting person. Correct? If you have a binding desire, what is implied by that is that you are a wanting person, you are lacking something, you are limited. Because in your own vision, you see yourself as lacking something. From there only desire is springing. And once desire is there, it has to be fulfilled. You are helpless. You have to do something to fulfill the desire, or otherwise you will be complaining about it. I wanted to be this, but I couldn't be. That is a tragedy, in fact. So either you are not able to do whatever you want to do to fulfill your desire and you are sad, or you do that and you don't get it and also you are sad, or you do that and you get it, and after you get it, it is no more great. Understand that whatever you have not achieved only is great. Once you have achieved it, it is gone. You know, your sights are on something else. No, that is the life of a samsari, correct? So there is no real solution in sight. It's a vicious cycle. It keeps on going the same manner. Now, to get out of that, you have to now analyze the reality of yourself as a lacking person, whether that itself is real or not. That's what we are analyzing here. So Bhagavan says, now the teaching, actual teaching is the 16th. 16th is one of the greatest verse in Bhagavad Gita to understand. You know, Bhagavan is presenting, he says, Nasato vidyate bhavaha, na bhavo vidyate sataha, ubhayorapi drishtontaha, tvanayos tattva darshibihi. So he says, but it looks very weird initially when you hear the translation. It says, asataha bhavaha na vidyate. Means what? Non-existence does not have existence. Okay, I know that. What is the big deal? Then he says, Sataha abhavaha na vidyate. Existence does not have any non-existence. Means what is this? It's not. And he says, now the one who understands these two things is a tattvadarshi. He knows the reality. He's a jnani. Means what is it? It's like stating the obvious, correct? So that's where we have to understand now. So here only the entire teaching of what is Satyam, what is Mithya is presented. Because when Bhagavan says Asat here, he is not talking about some unholy compound like rabbit's horn or Vandhya Putra and all we say in Sanskritam, correct? Barren woman's son. Or Kapushpaha and all they say, sky flower. We are not talking about an unholy compound, which sometimes we call it as Tucham or Atyanta Asat and all some people call. Even Atyanta Asat is actually defined differently by Nayayikas. But totally something which is non-existent, we are not talking about that because that is not even under context. Nobody is going to take a Vandhya Putra as existent, correct? Then there is no context for me to go and say non-existence does not have existence. So what is being said as Asat here, we have to understand. Asat here means something which appears to exist. But when you analyze, it does not exist. That is the Asat we are talking about. So you see a snake on the rope. Now it looks very real. But when you go and shine your torch on that, you see it is only a rope. So snake appeared. While it appeared, it looked very real. It caused you fear also. Or snake is too much. We don't even have to go to that. In fact, in Tamil, there is a Tirumandiram is there. Very great text. Okay, so I don't know how many of you know Tamil here, but he says, so in the Tirumandiram, beautifully he says, Marattai maraitadu mamada yanai. Like that. That means what? There's a great elephant, it seems. It looks ferocious. It looks like it's going to attack you. And you looked at it as an elephant means that elephant has covered that it is only wood. Really, it is a wooden sculpture. Okay. If you look at it as elephant, that elephant has covered the wood. You only see it as elephant. And now you are afraid, you are ready to run. In fact, you think that if you don't run from there, the elephant will get you. And nobody wants to be crushed under an elephant, correct? Whether you are Advaiti or Dvaiti or whoever you are. So you are ready to run. Why? Because the elephant covered the wood. But if you analyze it, what happens? Marattil maraindadu Mamadayane, he says. That great, ferocious, mad-looking elephant, once you look at it as wood, where is elephant? There is no elephantness in the wood, correct? The elephant has disappeared into the wood, literally. Whatever is there is really only wood. If you look at it as wood, there is only wood. You have not done anything here, understand that. You have not changed something. It is still elephant only if you look at it as elephant. But if you look at it as wood, it's only a cognitive change, understand that. Wood alone is there. There is no elephantness in wood. Similarly, he says, Paraptai maraitadu parmudal bhutam. He says all these panchabhutas, space and wind, Agni, fire, water, earth. So 5 elemental model we have of creation. All these panchabhutas, they have covered Param Brahma, the one reality which is there, which gives existence to everything. They are covering, they are only appearances, they are names and forms. And so you look at it as the world and yourself as separate from this world, then you are going to have fear, you are going to have problems. But when you understand the reality, what happens? Parattil maraindadu parmudal bhutam. All these panchabhutas have vanished into Param Brahma. It is only again a cognitive change. Because even every scientist nowadays understand what is Maya. Understand this. See, everything, whatever you see is not really what you see. Everything is only name. More names in names. Names in names. Names in names. Why? See, you say this body is there. Now somebody will come, the biologist will come and say, no, I only see molecules. I only see cells. Okay, let us start with cells. Cells are only there. Then somebody else will come and say, no, I only see protein molecules and DNA and RNA and all that. Then the physicist will come and say, no, there is only electrons, protons, neutrons. I only see atoms and subatomic particles. Then once you go into subatomic particle world, they don't know how this quantum system got collapsed. Okay, there is still a confusion is there. So some people say there has to be an observer. Then if the observer himself is a quantum system, then one quantum system, how can it collapse another? Or when did the first quantum system got collapsed? There is an infinite regress is there. So they don't know how to formulate their theory, but that's where they are standing now. So even if you analyze it scientifically, everything is reduced to only a few fundamental particles. Now, how did all these things become this variegated universe? That is Maya, in fact. Because at an atomic level, they say 99% is space. The nucleus is so small, the electron cloud around it also is very like distant. So 99% is space at one level if you see. But macro level, everything is there. There is solid, liquid, gas, plasma, whatever. You have so many states of matter. What is all these things? How can you even explain this? Means there is no explanation. If you ask one more why to a scientist, he has to say no. But scientists are very humble people. They know the limits of their knowledge. Okay, some of them may be having some problem, but mostly scientists know that. So they all appreciate what is Maya, but they don't know what is Satyam. That is what Bhagavan is teaching here. He says, this world which is all the time changing, which is Anityaha, it doesn't really exist because it's only an appearance. It's only name and form. What is there always is only the Sadvastu. Because in Chandogya Upanishad also, Sadeva Somya Idamagre Asid Ekameva Advitiyam. Like that only the teaching starts. So the 6th chapter of Chandogya is teaching you Tattvamasi, the famous Mahavakya. And there it starts by saying that the Sadvastu alone, whatever you see as this Jagat, the world, universe, when this universe was undifferentiated and in potential form, whatever was there before the universe got created, whether you say it is like a big bang and all that, before the big bang, what was there? Means Sadvastu alone was there, and that was one, only one, without a second. Ekameva Advitiyam Sadvastu alone is there. That Sadvastu is always there. Then later on it says Sadeva Satyam. That Sadvastu, which is the Jagat Karanam, which is non-dual, is Satyam. Satyam is an ontological term. That's what you have to understand. Satyam is not a Vastu by itself. Satyam means it is truth, means it is telling you the status of its reality. So here also same thing. Asataha bhavaha na vidyate means Bhagavan is saying Asat is mithya. It is appearing, but it is not true because it doesn't have any existence of its own. The snake doesn't have any existence of its own. Even the wooden elephant is really wood only, correct? There is no elephant there. Elephant doesn't have any existence of its own. Only wood is seen as elephant. If you see the wood as elephant, you have all the problems. If you see the world as world, you have all the problems. But what really there is only Param Brahma. If you see it as Param Brahma, there is only Param Brahma. Because what here Bhashyakara's Bhashya is very beautiful. He established that also. How can I understand that everything is Brahman? Brahman alone is there, means he says, I see this laptop, correct? Or I don't know what you are seeing this meeting with. You are having some of them are having mobile phone, some of you are called in through phone, I think. So whatever object you are seeing in front of you, you would have had dinner now, I think, most of you. So there is a table. So table consciousness is, he says, correct? See, any cognition means that object consciousness is. So you saw the table, table consciousness is. On the table there is an apple, apple consciousness is. There is an orange, orange consciousness is. You have a phone, phone consciousness is. Now in this, what is varying and what is invariable? Tell me. The objects are all changing, correct? But what is the invariable in each and every cognition is consciousness is. The consciousness is the invariable and in each and every cognition. That's so. But the problem with us is we look at the object and miss the obvious, which is there always. The consciousness is part, we take it for granted. In fact, this is what is taught even in Kenopanishad. There is a very, even my guru used to like this sentence. He used to always say it is his favorite. Is that it says Pratibodha Viditam Matam Amritatvam Hi Vindate. So Pratibodha Viditam Matam. Pratibodham, Bodham, Bodham, Prati means what? In each and every cognition, what is known? That is immortal, it says. What is known here is not the object. Understand that, because they are changing. What is really or what should be known? Each and every cognition is resolving into the conscious being, correct? Unless the conscious being is there, there is no knowledge. Every knowledge really is only pointing out the invariable subject, and the nature of the subject is consciousness. So consciousness is the invariable in each and every cognition, and that never gets replaced. Bhashyakara says that in the Bhashyam. That's why asataha abhavaha na vidyate. So even if you say there is a vacuum, physical vacuum can be there. But who is seeing the vacuum? Unless you see the vacuum, where is vacuum? And if you are seeing it, then consciousness is there, correct? There is no real vacuum. Even there you have to say vacuum consciousness is. Then consciousness is there still. Wherever your your mind can go, there the consciousness is already there. This is what is said in Ishavasya also. It presents it very nicely. It says that wherever your mind can go, already consciousness is sitting there, it seems. It will go faster than that. Because everything, whatever you can think of, it's all only because of the consciousness which is there. So one of the things which we have to analyze is what is Atma, what is Anatma, we have to first analyze. So here also Bhagavan talks about Dehi and Deha. So the Atma whatever I see is not I. That's all is the analysis. Understand? It's a very simple thing. Anybody can do that. What is that? Whatever I see cannot be I, because whatever I see is an object of knowledge. Now, here also there is no confusion with reference to a table or apple or orange and all those things. Then what about your body? I see my body. Then what is the conclusion now? I am not the body because I am seeing it. Okay, what about my hunger, thirst? To whom is it known? I know I am hungry. Then hunger is not you, it is only an object of your knowledge. What about my thoughts? I think I am idiot, I am stupid, I am knowledgeable, I am great, I am this, I am that, whatever. All thoughts are also evident to me. They rise, they fall back, they are replaced. My mind is evident to me. Mind is also an object of my knowledge. So I am that conscious being to whom everything becomes evident. And I don't have to objectify myself. I am self-revealing. That is what Swayam Prakashaha, Swatas Siddhaha we say. Why? Because the subject has to be already established always for any Pramana Vyapara. For a means of knowledge to be operated and know something, subject has to be already there. This subject is known in each and every cognition. And you have to understand that. And Veda only comes and says this subject is the cause of this entire world. Because everybody can do Atma Anatma Viveka and arrive at the fact that I am the subject, I am the conscious being to whom everything becomes evident. For this, you don't even require Veda. Although there is some confusion with regards to that, so Veda has to say that yes, you are a conscious being independent of your body, mind, sense complex. But that conscious being is the Ishvara, is the Jagat Karanam, is what the Mahavakya is. That's what Vedanta is teaching you. For that, Vedanta is the only means of knowledge, in fact, because no other means of knowledge even has access to this, to reveal this. And that teaching which Bhagavan continues, in fact. So, 16th verse is the main teaching. Then 17th also he continues, correct? Avinashitu tad viddi yena sarvamidam tatam vinasham avyayasyasya nakaschit kartum arhati. So, this conscious being which you are, you pervade everything, the entire world, he says. It is Avinashi, it is indestructible. Why? Later on, he will say, only that which can be objectified can be affected by all these Panchabhutas, correct? You can cut it, you can drown it, you can dry it, you can burn it. That which can never be objectified, how are you going to destroy it? You are always the eternal subject. You can never be objectified by any of these Shastras, Astras, whatever it is. So that's what Bhagavan is getting at. You are Avinashi. Okay, you can never be destroyed. Why? Because you are never the object of any knowledge. Understand that. You are indestructible. Your Atma is always the subject. And you are pervading this entire world because your consciousness only is making everything existent. In fact, the existence of all this Namarupa itself, it's dependent on you as a conscious being. You are the invariable in each and every cognition. The entire world can be divided into object and subject. And subject is the invariable. Subject can never be negated. The negator can never be negated. Understand that. Everything else you negate. Because they are all coming and going. They are agama, apayinaha, anityaha. In each and every cognition, the names and forms, the objects which you know are coming and going. But you are the subject. And you cannot be objectified. You need not be objectified. Understand that. You are the self-revealing, self-existent, conscious being who is limitless already. By mistake, we have an identity with reference to the body, mind, sense complex and take ourselves as limited and suffer. So to end all this suffering, what? Know your reality, who you are in reality. You are not lacking in any manner. You are the Purna Atma. Purushaha means, Puri Shayanat means the one who is sleeping in this body. So if you have a bodily identification, then you have a problem. But the same Purusha is Purnatvat Purushaha, we say. Means what? You are Purnaha, you are the complete, limitless, full in all the respects. You don't lack anything. You are not a wanting person, really. Once you understand that you are not a wanting person anymore, then you don't have to fulfill any desire or fulfill anything to become happy, correct? You are already who is totally acceptable to yourself. So the whole idea of Vedanta is what? The pursuit of Vedanta is really to discover that I am totally acceptable to myself as I am. You are not becoming anything newly. Okay. So that is the teaching of Vedanta. Also, actually, if you see continuation also are same. Antavanta ime dehaha. So he says only the bodies are going to end. But the Shariri, the one who is in the body, the conscious being, is Nitya. And is Anashinaha. He cannot be destroyed. And Aprameyaha also. I told you, correct? Atma is Aprameya, means what? Atma is never an object of knowledge. Atma is eternal subject. Everything becomes evident to the Atma. So something which can never be objectified can never be destroyed. That's what Bhagavan says again. And also, what about Atma being a Karta? Okay, Atma cannot be destroyed. Atma is always subject. Does Atma do anything then? Will Atma have guilt and hurt? Or guilt at least. If Atma is doing something wrong, if Atma goes and kills somebody, will it not have guilt? Means Bhagavan says Atma is not Karta also. Enam veti hantaram yasyainam manyate hatam ubhau tau na vijanita nayam hanti na hanyate. Consciousness is consciousness. Everything is active in its presence, but it does not do anything. It is in fact asangaha. It is not even connected to anything really. Everything is only superimposed on this consciousness. So you are not a karta bhokta. You are a conscious being. That is the teaching Bhagavan is giving here. And a continuation of that, if you see, you can understand in the same manner. Then he says, Atma is never born. Najayate mriyate va kadachite. Nayam bhutva bhavita na bhuyaha. Ajo nitya shashvato yam puranaha. Na hanyate hanyamane sharire. Even if the body dies, Atma never dies. Because Atma is not the body. Body may depend on the Atma. Our body depends on the Atma for its very existence. Because body becomes evident to you. But even when the body consciousness is not there, I am there. I am always there. Whether the body was small baby body, or body is the old body, or in the sleep body itself, there is no body consciousness is not there, or in dream you are having some other body. Understand that. So even the body consciousness is not the same always. It's all changing. So you should not take it to be your identity or a reality or anything. All the problems are there because you think you are an individual and you have identity with reference to your body, mind, sense complex. But Bhagavan is here trying to teach you that you are not really that. Okay, so you have to reclaim your identity as the conscious being who is the limitless conscious being, who is the cause of this entire world. That is the teaching here. I think mostly we are out of time here, so we'll stop here. But this portion of Bhagavad Gita is actually the teaching of Vedanta. Bhagavan starts with that so that Arjuna can understand that there is no reason for his sorrow. Because Bhagavan is not just saying don't be sorrowful. That kind of advice is useless, correct? You cannot go to somebody and say don't get angry. Then he'll get more angry with you. Because anger and sorrow and all these things are not willfully, you are not becoming sorrowful. I say, okay, now you become sad for half a minute. Means you cannot become that, correct? Or you become angry for half a minute means it won't come. So these things are happening, but happening because of certain delusion, certain confusion. So how do we then get rid of it? Means you have to understand. Only with knowledge and a certain cognitive change, you can get rid of all these things. That's what Bhagavan is presenting here. So he says there is no reason for you to be really sad or sorrowful because nobody really dies. In fact, Atma never goes out of existence, correct? Atma can never be non-existent. and that is the truth of everybody, in fact. So you don't have to really worry about that aspect, at least. So he starts with that. Later on, you can continue your studies. In fact, the second chapter itself is complete with reference to the teaching, if you see. If Arjuna had not asked a question in the third chapter, Bhagavad Gita should have ended with second chapter itself. But Arjuna was not convinced, because he always wanted to not fight and become a sannyasi. And Bhagavan always said that you are not fit for becoming a sannyasi. You have to do whatever is to be done. So that conversation then keeps on going, because Arjuna again and again he asks. Okay, not only in the third chapter, again in the fifth chapter he asked the same question. Again, even in the 18th chapter he asks a question. So that's how finally then he says, okay, nashto mohaha smritir labdha and all that. Okay. So like that, all of us can gain this knowledge like Arjuna. Okay. We are all in the same boat as Arjuna. If you have recognized your fundamental problem, then you are fit for moksha, and you have to only get a guru and read the Shastra properly and understand this. Then this knowledge is going to bless you. And there is no greater blessing, because there is nothing greater than limitlessness, correct? What you are gaining is limitless. And if you do not gain it in this lifetime, then the loss also is limitless. Understand that. Okay, Ihached na avedit athas. So Ihached avedit atha satyam asti. Like that it says. Nached iha vedin mahati vinashtihi. Mahati vinashtihi. Or you are a miser. Okay, this Brihadaranyaka says, if you leave this world without knowing yourself, then you are a miser, it says, because you have not really understood that you are limitless. So that is the loss. So all of us should make effort and understand this and get the blessings of this knowledge. So with that, we will close this session. Om Purnamadah Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnamevavashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Harihi Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Harihi Om.
Thank you so much, Guruji. I just want to open for the group if they had any questions for a couple minutes. Okay. Thank you so much, Guruji. I think it was such a nice synopsis for us to have learned all of that gist, and we were working on these shlokas for a few weeks. Everything got to us within an hour. Thank you so much for that. So wanted to chant a shloka from Guru Stotram by Adi Shankaracharya, so which actually felt was very apt for this class. It says, Aneka janma samprapta karmendhana vidahine atma jnanaknidanena tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. And I would like to just translate that for the group. Salutations to the Guru who burns away the fuel of karma, results of works impressed on the mind, accumulated over many births. By giving the fire of self-knowledge, salutations to that Guru. So with that, we thank you for your time and thank you for enlightening us tonight. So I'll just conclude with a short prayer. Om Sarve Bhavantu Sukhinah, Sarve Santu Niramayah, Sarve Bhadrani Pashyantu, Ma Kaschid Dukkha Bhag Bhaved. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Harihi Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Harihi Om. Loka samasta sukhino bhavantu. Sarvam Sriman Narayana Charanaravindarpanamastu. Thank you so much, Guruji. Appreciate your time.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you, Guruji.
Thank you, Guruji.
Thank you, Guru.
Thank you, Guruji.
धन्यवादः.
Thank you, Guruji.